Taking a break from the drama to hand out some end of the season awards, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is to become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm going to apologize in advance. My voice is starting to give out on me a little bit. I think a lot of it has to do with the weather that we're dealing with up here. Incredibly cold. We're talking like for the first half of this week, it was 0 degrees. And I think it's starting to wear on me a little bit. And I think it's nice to take a break here. I know I wanted to do this end of season award show earlier in the week, but I think this is kind of a nice palate cleanser, given what has transpired over the last 48 hours. Of course, I'm talking about the Liam Coen drama and him leaving the Bucs after withdrawing from the Jacksonville job and agreeing to stay and then disappearing and ghosting the Bucs and all that nonsense. And look, there's a lot of Jags fans taking victory laps on Twitter. There were a lot of Jags fans taking victory laps in the comments. And I'll say it one last time. I in no way am faulting Liam Coen for taking an opportunity to get one of these coveted jobs. I am in no way faulting Liam Coen for trying to put himself in a better situation, trying to better his career and do, something incredible for his family. I am faulting him for the way that he handled it. And for those that haven't seen, I texted it out to the insiders. Albert Breer over at SI.com had an incredible breakdown of essentially the timeline of events of how this all came to be. And to be honest, it does not make Coen look any better when you break down how all of this came to be. But look, it's over. Liam Coen is gone. He went about it a very poor way, in my opinion, in many people's opinion. But it's over. And we're going to start looking at potential offensive coordinator candidates next week. I'll start doing some deep dives. I'll bring on some guests. We're going to try to figure out who the Bucs are going to hire. But it is now time to hand out some end of season awards to the 2024 Buccaneers. I've gone through a lot of these, and the insiders sent in their picks for all of these awards. So those have been tabulated. There's a couple of differences throughout these awards, but here is what we are going to hand out awards for. And this is, again, just the Buccaneers. We got MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Most Improved, Most Disappointing, Play of the Year, Game of the Year, and Best Free Agent Signing. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with the best free agent signing of the season. And there are quite a few choices. You got Sterling Shepard, you got Jordan Whitehead, Ben Bredeson, Mike Edwards, Shaq Barrett. For the record, this does not include players that were with the Bucs before and then entered free agency and re-signed. So like Levante David is not eligible for this award, but this one seems pretty easy. Before the year, I would have predicted that this award would go to Jordan Whitehead, but the insiders overwhelmingly agreed with my choice of Ben Bredeson as the best free agent signing for the Buccaneers this season. He really stepped up and helped this offensive line perform so much better than last season. I know Baker was sacked 40 times for the second straight year, but those weren't all on the offensive line. Whereas last season, I think the vast majority of sacks were on the offensive line. You also have the huge improvement in the run game thanks to the additions of Bredesen and Graham Barton. So he was the easy choice here for the best free agent. Hopefully, the Bucs are going to be able to bring him back next year, keep that continuity along the starting offensive line, let them build off of their massive improvement throughout the season, and really be a force for next year. But next up, let's go with the most improved. Again, lots of choices and lots of different ways to interpret this. And I didn't really think about it when I reached out to the insiders. And this was one of the questions with the widest range of answers from those insiders that texted in with their votes. There were votes for Cody Mauch, Luke Gedeke, Zion McCollum, Chase McLaughlin. But overall, the insiders selected Jalen McMillan as their most improved player of the year. And I understand how they got to that point because they were looking at the start of the year versus the end of the year. But for me, it was the biggest improvement from last year to this year. So those insiders kind of interpreted it a different way than I intended, but I love that. And to me, this one goes to Zion McCollum. The massive leap that he has taken over the last few years is remarkable, but to have nearly 300 more snaps this season and allow the same number of receptions as he did in just 9 starts last year. I talked about him last week, going through all the different ways that he had improved: fewer yards after catch allowed per reception, lower completion percentage when targeted, lower reception percentage, more pass breakups, more interceptions. He really established himself as a top starting corner for the team, and I think we're going to continue to see even more growth next year, more than likely when the Bucs move on from Jamel Dean and you have Zion McCollum and then some type of newcomer, whether it's via the draft or via free agency there on the other side. But if we're going to hand out an award for the most improved, we also have to talk about the most disappointing. And this is the only award that basically has a negative connotation. The rest of it, it's going to be uplifting. We're going to be happy. We're going to be reminiscing. But we are going to hand this award out regardless. The insiders were kind of all over the place on this one, but ultimately they voted for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka as the most disappointing player this season, and it's hard to argue with that. I don't think Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is going to be back next year. If he is, it's going to be on a very team-friendly deal because he just never quite lived up to that first-round hype. He never really lived up to the way he started the 2024 season, the way he started the 2023 season. Both years, he started off really, really well and then just tapered off to the point of completely disappearing. But that's not the guy that I selected. Maybe it's because my expectations weren't very high to begin with. But for the most disappointing player this year, I have to go with Antoine Winfield Jr. I talked about it some last Friday's episode, but he's coming off the All-Pro season, and he had to come out and play the way that he did last year, or at least close to it. And instead, he had a really, really poor season, and it was a massive letdown. And I'm not saying that he was bad, kind of like how Diaby was disappointing, but he wasn't bad. He just, Winfield just didn't live up to the expectations. The same can be said, of Diaby. But when you take a look at Winfield Jr., injuries, of course, had a lot to do with it. He got hurt in the first game of the year and then never really seemed to be 100% the rest of the way. He missed 8 games this year, but he wasn't his usual self even when he did return in week 6, even when he did return in the playoff game. So much like I expect even more improvement out of Zion McCollum next season, he's taken some pretty massive jumps. I expect another big jump next year. I also expect a huge bounce back season from Antoine Winfield Jr. next year, and to see him return to that all-pro level of play. We do have more awards coming up. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, all one word, to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener review every day. The new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. You got the madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning. Then you got Tony Wiggins, the host of Locked On Jaguars, who has taken some serious shots at Bucs fans, but we still love Amp. We love what he does over there. He has his little barbershop for some real NFL talk. Then you add in the Locked On local experts. You get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. So make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's get into a couple of team awards here before we move on to more individual awards. And let's start with the game of the year. And there were some great ones this season. You had the big win in Detroit in week 2, coming off of that divisional round loss in that same building. Really shocked the NFL world. You had the beatdown of the Saints, the beatdown of the Eagles, the beatdown of the Chargers, the division clincher against the Saints, the overtime win against the Panthers. But which one was the best of the best? The insiders were nearly unanimous in selecting the win in Los Angeles over the Chargers and their number 1 scoring defense. And I was real close to picking that game. I mean, really close to picking the win in Detroit, considering they didn't have Kalijah Kancey. They didn't have Antoine Winfield Jr. in that game. But I have to go with the win in New Orleans. It just had a little bit of everything going on. The Bucs jump out to the early lead, then they turn the ball over a couple of times, and the Saints get hot and they take the lead. Then the Bucs battle back with arguably their best half of football all season long. Chris Godwin had 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sean Tucker ran wild. Winfield had the scoop and score. Tyke Smith had the interception. It was a game where the Bucs were punched square in the mouth. They faced some adversity, and then they answered the call. I thought that was going to be the game that we looked back on as a pivotal moment in the 2024 season. Instead, the Bucs would lose their top 2 playmakers on offense the very next week. One of them they lose for the season, and they would go on to lose 4 in a row, face the adversity again, have to battle all the way back to win the division through the second half of the year. But I really thought that Saints game was going to be a major moment in the rise of the 2024 Buccaneers. You know, injuries happen, but that to me was the best game of the year. But what about play of the year? And there were a lot of different votes here. I mean, obviously the Bucs ran hundreds upon hundreds of plays all season long, but there were votes for plays like Baker hitting McMillan on that 4th and 8, Baker absolutely bowling over Bobby Wagner in the playoff game. But there's one play for me, and the overwhelming majority of insiders that all agree on this one. And the play of the year goes to the 9-yard catch by Mike Evans in week 18 to get him up over 1,000 yards for the 11th straight season. No explanation really needed here. That was an epic moment. It was really cool that, you know, the Bucs dialed that up for him in that moment, that Todd Bowles said, you know what, you don't need to take a knee. Let's get Mike the ball. Let's get him his yards, and then let's get out of here and get ready for a playoff game. The emotion of Mike himself, but the emotion that was pouring out of his teammates, the way that stadium erupted when he got that milestone, and for it to come against the Saints made it just a little bit better than I think it would have been in any other situation. But that to me was the ultimate play of the year. Moving on to rookie of the year. Again, this one's not going to take long. It was a unanimous choice among insiders, the obvious choice. Bucky Irving wins your Buccaneers Rookie of the Year. 1,122 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, the third most carries per yard, flip that, reverse it. Third most yards per carry by a running back, a rookie running back in NFL history. Just what an absolute season from Bucky Irving. I cannot wait to see what he does next season. It's criminal that he was not named one of the 5 finalists for the Rookie of the Year award at the NFL Honor Show. And look, no disrespect to Brian Thomas Jr. He had a really, really good season. No disrespect to Malik Neighbors. He had a really good season. But no rookie had more total yards or touchdowns than Bucky Irving did. Bucky Irving was next level. And, I went through, I think it was on Friday's show last week, I went through the amount of touches that he had before the bye week and after the bye week and the stark difference. So imagine if you extrapolate the amount of opportunities that he had the final 7 games versus the first 10. We could be talking about a running back that was up there at 1,800 yards, definitely in the double-digit touchdowns. Criminal that he was not one of the finalists. Let's go ahead and get into Defensive Player of the Year. This was another one where the insiders had a few different players that they voted on. There was some love shown to Yaya Diaby, Zion McCollum, even Tyke Smith. But by and large, it was a 2-player race. The insiders voted for Big 5-0 Vita Vea as the Defensive Player of the Year by 1 vote. That was the difference. Vita Vea wins by 1 vote, and it's a really good choice. The second most sacks on the team was 7. He had 10 tackles for loss, plus the amount of disruptions that he caused opposing offensive lines in both the pass and the run game, the opportunities that he opened up for other guys on the defense. He was a game wrecker, and that's what he is. He is a wrecking ball. The only defensive player from the Buccaneers to be selected to the Pro Bowl. Ultimately, I'm glad that Vea snuck out a close win amongst the insiders, because my selection is the guy that the insiders chose in second place, the guy that Vita beat out by 1 vote, and it's Lavonte David. He's the absolute model of consistency. He was the team leader in tackles with 122. He had 5.5 sacks, which was good for a tie for third on the team. 9 tackles for loss, 6 passes defensed, an interception, 3 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery. And honestly, I don't know how he does it year after year after year at such a high level. It's amazing to me that he can still play like he's 25 years old, when in reality, he's coming up on potentially his 14th season in the league if he decides to run it back. Still one of the most underrated and overlooked players in the league, and has been since 2012 when he was drafted. And he has numbers that match up or surpass numerous Hall of Fame linebackers. So if there's one thing that number 54 is, it's reliable no matter what the situation. Offensive Player of the Year and Buccaneers 2024 MVP. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending the Foo Fighters concert last year. It was an unbelievable show. Definitely in my top 5 concerts of all time. And right before I started recording this show, my wife and I were talking about not 1, not 2, but 3 concerts that we're planning on going to see this year. And we check out Game Time when it comes time to get those tickets, because Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I was looking for tickets to an upcoming concert that I'm going to be going to with my son in February, and I used the Game Time app and the Game Time Picks. I found an amazing deal, could see the view from my seat before I bought it, and this super deal was a particularly good one. Great seats, unbeatable price, and the app's all-in pricing showed the total cost up front, so I didn't have any surprise fees when I got to checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Wrapping things up here on a palate cleansing Friday episode of Locked On Bucs. So yeah, it's nice to go back and look at some of the great things that the Bucs did. Get a little bit of the bad taste out of all of our mouths, and we have 2 awards left. We have Offensive Player of the Year, and we have the team MVP. And we're going to start this last segment here with the Offensive Player of the Year. And this one was really tough. And it seemed that the overwhelming majority of insiders thought it was a no-brainer. They believed it was Mike Evans. He ran away with that vote. Only 3 players among all insiders got a vote that were not named Mike Evans. But those were the only 3 insiders that didn't vote for Evans. So, I mean, another 1,000-yard season, most receiving yards of any receiver in the league from week 11 to the end of the year, 11 touchdowns, 53 of his 74 receptions resulted in a first down. Mike, as always, was outstanding, especially when he played less than 14 total games. With that all said, I think I have to give the official Locked On Bucs Offensive Player of the Year award to somebody else. And this is nothing against Mike, but when I think of the Offensive Player of the Year, I'm thinking of the guy that really changed the course of who the Bucs were on that side of the ball. Like, Evans and Baker went bananas last season too. And I think had he stayed healthy, this award is probably going to Chris Godwin. But given how things played out, and we're about to have our first player win multiple Locked On Bucs end of season awards, but my Offensive Player of the Year is Bucky Irving, man. He changed the way the Bucs were as an offense. Early in the year, it was Rashad, but he couldn't do the things that Bucky could. And it wasn't until we saw the drastic increase in opportunities for Irving that this rushing attack really went from the bottom of the league up to the top. Before the bye week, he had just 2 games where he had double-digit carries. And one of those games was against the Saints when Rashad was out. So it was just Bucky and Sean Tucker as the running backs. After the bye week, there was just 1 game where he didn't have double-digit carries, and that was against Vegas, and he left that game early with an injury. Before the bye week, just 1 game where Bucky had more than 15 touches in a game. After the bye week, only that Vegas game did he have fewer than 15 touches. Bucky was the guy that truly turned the Bucs into a 2-dimensional offense. Even with Rashad's 990 yards on the ground last season, they never felt like a team that was truly a dual threat offense. Now with Bucky, they don't just feel like a dual threat offense, but they feel like one of the best dual threat offenses in the league. To me, that's what gives him the edge in this award and makes him my Offensive Player of the Year. Now, we'll have to see what kind of offensive philosophy the new coordinator has, but I get the feeling that Bucky Irving is going to be a big part of the draw to that job, along with the offensive line and Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan and probably Chris Godwin. But that brings us to our final award of the show, and it's the Buccaneers team MVP for 2024. This was indeed another unanimous decision among the insiders as well as myself. It's Baker Mayfield. Back-to-back career years for Mayfield, and he certainly showed that he was worth every penny of that huge contract that the Bucs gave him in the offseason. 4,500 yards, 41 touchdowns in the air, another 378 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. I could not be more impressed with the way that Baker played without Evans and Godwin on the field for a month. He kept the Bucs in every one of those games. And yes, they did lose all 4 of them, but they had a chance in every one of them because of Baker Mayfield's play. Whether he was looking to Cade Otton or Shep or Ryan Miller or using his running backs in the passing game, using his legs and putting his body on the line and trucking into guys twice his size, Baker kept the Bucs incredibly competitive without their top 2 weapons. Then even after getting Evans back and being without Godwin, they still win 6 out of 7 and win the division. There aren't too many teams in the NFL that can lose not just their number 1, but their number 2 receiver as well, and walk into Kansas City in prime time and take the Chiefs to overtime. I mean, I can't think of one off the top of my head right now. I can't think of a team where you lose their number 1 and number 2 receivers and they still on the road take the Chiefs to overtime. I mean, I don't even think the Lions are doing that if they lose Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams. So Baker deserves so much credit for what he did this season. And the only reason he isn't in the the league MVP conversation, or that he wasn't selected to the Pro Bowl, was the interceptions, which were, albeit they were too high this year. And then, of course, the team's overall record. Obviously, you don't have Liam Coen coming back, but hopefully the Bucs are able to bring Chris Godwin back and they can build off of what they were able to do this year next year. I mean, can you imagine having Chris Godwin back in the fold and, then all of a sudden you're not waiting until halfway through the season to make Bucky the top running back. You're not losing Evans and Godwin in the same game and being without both of them for a month, hopefully. Having Jalen McMillan play a full year the way he played the final month and a half. It's not hyperbole when I say that the Bucs could wind up with the most explosive offense in the NFL in 2025. They don't have that without Baker at the helm. And I think being the official Locked On Bucs Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2024 MVP is well deserved. It is certainly earned. And I think all those players, all those improvements, everything that I just mentioned is why. It's a coin flip between the Buccaneers and the Lions as to who has the most desirable offensive coordinator opening right now. You can look to pro coaches. You can look to college coaches. You can look anywhere. Those are the 2 most coveted jobs because of the ability of those offenses to be able to drop 30 in the blink of an eye, to have all those weapons, to have established offensive lines, to have, dual threat running backs, to have, these elite receivers. It's going to be really, really interesting to see who all's going to fight for the opportunity to be the offensive coordinator in Tampa in 2025. And we'll be here to cover it all. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, make sure that you are following on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.